In 1930, a bulldozer operator clearing jungle for the United Fruit Company in the Diquís Delta pushed his blade into the earth and hit something that stopped him cold. It wasn't bedrock. It wasn't a root mass. It was a perfect stone sphere. Nearly 8 feet across. Weighing somewhere in the neighborhood of 16 tons. And it was round in a way that felt wrong, too round, too deliberate, too precise to have come from a river or a geological process. He'd found one. But there were hundreds more hiding in that jungle. And the question of who made them and how has never been answered. Not really. Let's establish what we're actually dealing with. The stone spheres of Costa Rica, known formally as the Diquís spheres, are pre-Columbian artifacts found primarily in the Osa Peninsula and the surrounding lowlands of southern Costa Rica. They range dramatically in size, from small spheres you could hold in one hand to giants nearly 2.5 meters in diameter. There are over 300 confirmed specimens. Some researchers believe there were once far more, before the banana industry and treasure hunters damaged or destroyed dozens of them in the 20th century. That destruction is its own tragedy. When the United Fruit Company began clearing land in the 1930s and 40s, workers found the spheres and assumed they were hollow, that gold might be hidden inside. So they drilled into them. Blasted some with dynamite. Found nothing but solid stone. Granite, andesite, limestone. Dense, uniform, unforgiving. What they didn't find was any tool, any inscription, any burial record, any written instruction left behind by the people who made them. Nothing that said, here is why we did this. The civilization credited with creating the spheres is called the Diquís culture, sometimes grouped under the broader label of the Chiriqui culture. They inhabited this region roughly between 700 AD and 1530 AD, when Spanish colonization effectively ended their way of life. They had sophisticated goldwork. They had hierarchical social structures. They traded across wide networks in pre-Columbian Central America. But they had no metal tools capable of shaping granite. No iron. No steel. No written language we've recovered. And no wheel. This is where the discomfort starts. Archaeologist Doris Stone, daughter of a United Fruit Company executive and one of the first serious researchers to study the spheres, began documenting them in the 1940s. She measured them, photographed them, mapped their locations. Her work established the basic academic record. But even she couldn't answer the fundamental question, how were objects of this size and precision created by hand, with stone tools, in a jungle environment? The leading hypothesis is a process called pecking and grinding. You start with a rough boulder. You chip away at the surface with smaller, harder stones. You grind it down incrementally. You check it constantly against a measuring system, perhaps a cord or a wooden template, rotating it, adjusting, removing material until the sphere approaches roundness. It's painstaking. It could take months or years per sphere. And it demands both mathematical understanding and extraordinary patience. Here's what makes that answer both plausible and unsatisfying. Some of the spheres achieve a roundness accurate to within 0.5% of geometric perfection. Modern analysis has confirmed this. 0.5%. For context, a high-quality modern ball bearing has tolerances that are tighter, but not by a staggering margin. The Diquís people, working by hand with stone tools in a tropical rainforest, achieved something that edges toward industrial precision. Without any of the infrastructure we associate with industrial precision. That doesn't mean it was impossible. It means it was extraordinary. And the fact that we can't reconstruct the exact process, because no tools, no workshops, no in-progress spheres were ever found, means a crucial chapter of the story is simply missing. Now here's where it gets stranger. Many of the spheres were found in alignments. Groups of 3, 4, sometimes more, arranged in lines or triangles or clusters that appear deliberately geometric. Some point toward magnetic north. Some seem to mirror astronomical alignments. Researchers have proposed that the spheres marked social spaces, plazas outside the homes of chiefs or elite figures, symbols of status and authority rather than functional objects. That interpretation has archaeological support. In pre-Columbian societies across the Americas, monumental construction was often tied to political power. The sphere as a statement of prestige, we have the resources, the labor, the time to make this, makes cultural sense. But the alignments raise a harder question: how were 16-ton granite spheres moved from the quarries where the stone originated, quarries that were, in some cases, over 50 miles away, to the precise locations where they were placed? There's no river route that explains all of the placements. Some spheres are on elevated ground. Some are in locations that would have required moving them over difficult terrain. The Diquís people had no wheeled vehicles. No draft animals larger than a dog. Experimental archaeologists have shown that large groups of people using wooden rollers and rope can move massive stones across flat ground. It's slow. It's grueling. It works. But 50 miles of jungle? Uphill? That's not an experiment that's been fully replicated. That's a logistical achievement that demands organization, planning, and sustained collective effort at a scale that reshapes how we think about this society. In 2014, the Diquís spheres were designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, specifically the pre-Columbian chiefdom settlements with stone spheres of the Diquís. 4 sites are protected. The recognition matters because it signals international acknowledgement of how significant and how fragile this record is. But UNESCO designation doesn't answer the core questions. It preserves the evidence. It doesn't decode it. What we know, assembled carefully, the spheres were made between roughly 600 AD and 1000 AD, with production likely peaking in that window. They were crafted from locally available stone, shaped by hand, and placed in socially meaningful arrangements near settlements and burial sites. The culture that made them was complex, hierarchical, and artistically sophisticated. What we don't know, the exact technique, the full symbolic meaning, the precise movement logistics, and, perhaps most hauntingly, why they stopped. Around 1500 AD, sphere production appears to have ceased. The population declined. Whether this was due to disease moving ahead of Spanish contact, internal conflict, environmental pressure, or something else entirely, we don't know. The Diquís people didn't vanish instantly. But their civilization contracted, fractured, and was then absorbed into the chaos of colonization. And with it went whatever knowledge governed the spheres. There's a version of this story that reaches for aliens, for lost advanced civilizations, for explanations that leap past the human. You'll find that version everywhere online. But the human explanation is more interesting, and honestly, more unsettling. A culture without metal tools, without writing, without the wheel, built something so geometrically precise that modern researchers are still working out how. They moved them across jungle terrain we still can't fully account for. They arranged them in patterns that suggest sophisticated spatial and possibly astronomical thinking. And then they were gone, and the knowledge went with them. The spheres are still there. In museum courtyards. In jungle clearings. In the gardens of houses where they were moved by people who didn't know what they were carrying. They're still perfectly round. Still waiting for an answer that may never come. If this kind of deep, unresolved history is what you're looking for, subscribe to Lost Epochs. There's more where this came from, and none of it is simple.